I always knew my mother-in-law, Carol, despised me. It wasn't just dislike. It was a venom that simmered beneath her polished exterior. Her smile, sharp as a blade, never touched her cold, calculating eyes when I entered her pristine domain. She'd call me by Emily's ex's name. "Oh, Michael, sorry, dear," with a smirk that said the mistake was no accident. Her manicured fingers, nails like blood-red talons, would clench her wine glass whenever I dared speak, as if my voice alone was an affront to her carefully curated world. But hatred? That I could handle. What I didn't expect was the moment I realized she wanted me dead. It came at her mahogany dining table, under the flicker of her heirloom chandelier, when I caught her dropping something into my wine. The act was almost poetic in its precision. A subtle flick of her wrist, a motion so fluid it screamed rehearsal. A single, unassuming pill, small, white, sinister, plummeted into the deep crimson of my Cabernet. It fizzed briefly, dissolving into nothingness, leaving no trace but the truth. Carol wasn't just resentful. She was lethal. No hesitation clouded her eyes. No guilt softened her features. Just the icy certainty of a woman who'd judged me unworthy of breath. In that heartbeat, I saw her for what she was, a predator who'd already written my obituary. So I did what any cornered animal would. I turned her trap against her. With a sleight of hand born of instinct, I swapped my glass for her husband's. Gerald, oblivious as ever, raised the tainted wine in a half-hearted toast, his gruff voice muttering, "To family." He drank deeply, sealing his fate. The irony was exquisite. One moment, Carol was the hunter, savoring her triumph. The next, she watched, horrified, as her poison coursed through the veins of the man she'd vowed to love till death do them part. Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic breaking her composure, but it was too late. The glass was empty. Gerald's fate was sealed. Funny, isn't it? How fate pivots on a single choice. Carol thought she'd scripted my end, but I rewrote the scene. And death? It's a patient listener, waiting for the final act to unfold. The Lockwoods didn't host family dinners. They staged performances, each one a meticulously choreographed charade. Every Sunday at 7 p.m. sharp, the heavy velvet curtain of their sprawling colonial home rose on the same tired production, a portrait of the perfect family in 3 acts. Act 1, polite conversation over appetizers, where smiles were as brittle as the crackers served with Carol's imported caviar. Act 2, passive aggression with the main course, where every compliment hit a barb sharp enough to draw blood. Act 3, dessert and disappointment, where the facade cracked just enough to reveal the resentment simmering beneath. My wife, Emily, was the undisputed star of this grim theater. The dutiful daughter, she navigated her mother's verbal landmines with a grace that seemed almost rehearsed. Carol's backhanded compliments slid off her like rain on glass. "You're looking rested, darling. Finally using that vacation time." Translation, "You've gained weight, and I'm judging you for it." Or, with a pointed glance at me, "Oh, you brought him again?" Translation, "We're still waiting for you to divorce this nobody and return to the family's good graces." Emily would smile, her lips tight, her eyes distant, as if she'd been trained since childhood to absorb the blows without flinching. Me? I was the stagehand, the unseen laborer who existed to keep the lights on and the wine flowing. To the Lockwoods, I was a shadow, a necessary inconvenience tethered to their daughter's inexplicable choice. They looked through me, never at me, their gazes sliding past as if I were part of the furniture. And that was my greatest advantage. When people think you're invisible, they forget to guard their secrets. They forget to hide their tells. Invisibility is a gift. It lets you see the cracks in the performance, the fleeting glances, the tightened jaws, the truths no one dares speak aloud. And on that fateful Sunday, I saw more than I ever had before. The air felt wrong before we even crossed the threshold of Carol's immaculate home. It wasn't just the tension that always hung over these dinners like a storm cloud. Something was off, a subtle discord that set my nerves on edge. First, there was the smell. Carol's obsessive cleaning rituals usually left the house reeking of lemon bleach and barely concealed rage, a sterile scent that clung to every surface. But tonight, a new note lingered beneath it. Bitter, almost medicinal, like crushed almonds or something darker. It wasn't the usual aroma of roasted meat or herbs from the kitchen. It was sharp, invasive, and it made the hairs on my neck stand up. Second, Gerald's car was missing. This was unprecedented. Gerald Lockwood, with his metronome-like punctuality, was as predictable as the tides. His silver Mercedes, polished to a mirror shine, was always parked in the driveway, a silent testament to his control over the family's rhythm. Yet tonight, the driveway was empty, save for Emily's modest sedan. I glanced at her, but she was already staring at the house, her brow furrowed. And third, Emily's grip on my arm tightened as we climbed the front steps, her fingers digging into my sleeve. "She's in a mood," she whispered, her voice low, urgent. There was no need to clarify who she was. Carol's moods were legendary, capable of souring the air like a chemical spill. But this warning felt different, heavier, as if Emily sensed something I hadn't yet grasped. I nodded, my pulse quickening. The stage was set, but the script felt rewritten, and I didn't know my lines. Carol greeted us at the door, her smile so wide it seemed to strain the muscles of her face. It was a predator's grin, all teeth and no warmth, framed by the perfect crimson of her lipstick. "Darling, you're late," she trilled, swooping in to air-kiss Emily's cheeks, her movements as rehearsed as a dancer's. Me? I might as well have been a ghost. Her eyes slid past me, her acknowledgement limited to a faint tightening of her jaw. Emily stiffened, her shoulders squaring. "Mom, we're right on time." Gerald's indisposed. Carol interrupted, her voice dripping with saccharine concern. "Stomach issues." Again, she waved a hand, dismissing the topic as if it were a minor inconvenience, but her eyes flicked to me. Just for a heartbeat. Just long enough to send a shiver down my spine. That's when I noticed it. The smear of red at the corner of her mouth. Not lipstick, though it was the same shade. It was wine, a faint stain that stood out against her flawless complexion. I glanced at the glass in her hand, expecting to see a matching hue, but it was pristine, untouched. The discrepancy gnawed at me. Carol didn't make mistakes like that. She was too controlled, too deliberate. So why the stain? And why was her glass empty when the evening had barely begun? We moved to the dining room, where Gerald was already seated, slumped in his chair like a man carrying the weight of the world. His face was the color of old dishwater, pale and faintly gray, his usually crisp shirt wrinkled and damp with sweat. He didn't stand when we entered, didn't even look up, his thick fingers kneading his stomach as if he could physically push the pain away. "Evening, sir," I said, keeping my tone neutral. He grunted, his bloodshot eyes lifting just enough to shoot a venomous glare at Carol. "Your mother made coke au vin," he muttered, his voice thick with irritation. Again, Emily's glance darted to me, her lips parting slightly. Gerald despised coke au vin, a fact Carol knew well. The dish, with its heavy wine sauce and overpowering herbs, had been the subject of his complaints for years. Yet here it was, steaming on the table, its rich aroma mingling with that strange, bitter scent I'd noticed earlier. Carol's choice wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate, a quiet act of defiance, or something more sinister. I studied Gerald's hunched form, the way his breaths came in shallow, uneven bursts. This wasn't just discomfort. It was something deeper, something that made my instincts scream. Then I saw it, and the room seemed to narrow to a single point. My place setting was a work of art, a testament to Carol's obsessive precision. Silverware aligned with mathematical accuracy, a linen napkin folded into an elegant swan, and at the center, a single wine glass filled with a pour so deep it was nearly black. The liquid caught the chandelier's light, glinting like a warning. No one else's glass was touched. Emily's sat empty, as did Gerald's and Carol's. The bottle, a dusty, aged Cabernet, rested at Carol's elbow, its label proclaiming a vintage 2 decades old. "Mom, you didn't have to," Emily began, her voice uncertain. "Oh, it's nothing," Carol purred, gliding toward me with the bottle in hand. "I found this in the cellar. Aged 20 years. I thought he might appreciate it," she said, he with the same contempt one might reserve for a stray dog. Her fingers brushed mine as she handed me the glass, cold and steady. Too steady, as if she were forcing calm. But I saw it. The tremor, not in her hands but in her pulse, a frantic flutter at her wrist. Excitement. Anticipation. The kind that comes when a plan is falling into place. I held the glass, the weight of it heavy in my palm, and felt the first stirrings of dread. I didn't drink. Not when Carol accidentally knocked over Emily's water glass. her eyes darting to my untouched wine as the liquid spilled across the table. "Oh, clumsy me," she laughed, but her gaze was sharp, searching. Not when Gerald lurched to his feet, his chair screeching against the hardwood. "I need air," he gasped, his hand clutching his chest, his face a mask of pain. Carol's lips twitched, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features before she smoothed it away. Not even when Emily, desperate to salvage the evening, raised her own glass, now filled with water, and said, "To family," her voice trembling with forced cheer. The room held its breath, but I stayed still, my wine untouched, my eyes locked on Carol. Because here's the thing about poisoners. They can't resist watching their prey. They need to see the moment their trap snaps shut, the instant their victory is assured. And Carol? Her eyes never left my lips. Her pupils dilated with a hunger that wasn't for the meal. That's when it hit me, a cold, crystalline truth that cut through the fog of denial. This wasn't just a dinner. It was the dinner. The one Carol had been planning for months, perhaps longer. The one where every detail, the bitter scent, Gerald's absence, the wine glass, had been orchestrated with surgical precision. The one where I wasn't a guest but the main course, served up to satisfy her twisted vision of family. I wasn't just in danger. I was the target of a performance designed to end with my curtain call. And as Carol's gaze burned into me, I knew I had to rewrite the script or become its final victim. The dining room was a pressure cooker, the air thick with unspoken grudges and the cloying scent of Carol's cocoa vin. Gerald's voice, gravelly and laced with pain, cut through the tension as he grumbled mid-complaint, his words slurring slightly from discomfort. Like a goddamn furnace in my chest, his thick fingers kneaded his sternum, as if he could physically shove the burning agony back into submission. His face, usually ruddy from years of scotch and self-importance, had taken on a waxy sheen, beads of sweat glistening at his temples despite the chill that clung to the room. The chandelier above cast sharp shadows across his features, turning him into a grotesque caricature of the patriarch he pretended to be. Carol didn't even glance up from her plate. Her knife sliced through her chicken with surgical precision, each cut deliberate, controlled, as if she were dissecting more than just the meal. "Take your pills, Gerald," she snapped, her voice a whip crack of dismissal. "No one wants to hear about your digestion." The words were cold, devoid of concern, and they landed like a slap. Gerald's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his hands trembling as they hovered over his chest. Emily, seated beside me, exhaled sharply through her nose, a sound I'd come to recognize as her silent scream. Her fork stabbed into her salad with unnecessary force, the tine scraping against the porcelain plate like nails on a chalkboard. She was unraveling, caught between her father's obvious distress and her mother's callous indifference. Her eyes darted to me, pleading for something, reassurance, intervention, anything, but I kept my face neutral, my gaze elsewhere. And me? I watched. Not Gerald's trembling hands, which now clutched the edge of the table as if it were a lifeline. Not Emily's white-knuckled grip on her fork, her knuckles pale against the silver. No, my eyes were locked on Carol. The way her left thumb tapped, once, twice, a third time, against the delicate stem of her wine glass, a rhythm too precise to be unconscious. The way her nostrils flared ever so slightly when Gerald groaned again, a sound that seemed to grate against her carefully constructed composure. Impatient, hungry. She wasn't just enduring this moment. She was waiting for it, savoring the anticipation like a predator circling its prey. That's when the pieces clicked into place, sharp and cold as a blade against my spine. Gerald's heartburn wasn't an inconvenience. It wasn't a coincidence. It was part of the script, a script Carol had written with meticulous care. His pain, his pallor, the bitter almond scent that still lingered in the air, they weren't random. They were deliberate, a prelude to the main event. And I was the intended finale, the sacrificial lamb meant to close the curtain on her perfect family drama. But I wasn't ready to play my part. Not yet. The moment came like a gift, wrapped in Gerald's clumsiness. He reached for his water glass, a heavy crystal relic that had survived 3 Lockwood divorces and 1 infamous Thanksgiving food fight, when Carol's brother had lobbed a dinner roll at Gerald's head. His fingers, slick with sweat, slipped on the smooth surface, sending ice cubes clattering across the table. The sound was sharp, jarring, a crack in the suffocating silence. Water splashed onto the pristine tablecloth, a small rebellion against Carol's obsessive order. Perfect. I stood so fast my chair screeched against the hardwood, the noise cutting through the room like a gunshot. "You look pale, sir," I said, injecting just enough concern into my voice to sound convincing. It wasn't hard. Gerald looked like death warmed over, his lips tinged faintly blue, his eyes glassy with pain. "Here, try mine." Emily blinked up at me, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. "What are you?" she started, but I was already moving, my body acting on instinct honed by years of surviving the Lockwood's subtle warfare. One smooth motion, fluid as a magician's sleight of hand. My wineglass, the one Carol had filled with that suspiciously dark Cabernet, the one she'd washed with predatory intensity, slid into Gerald's damp, trembling palm. His water glass, cold and safe, found its way into mine. The swap was seamless, executed in the blink of an eye, hidden by the chaos of Gerald's spill and my own calculated haste. Carol's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing to slits. For a fraction of a second, her mask slipped, revealing a flash of raw panic. Her lips parted, as if to speak, to stop him, but it was too late. Gerald, ever the oblivious showman, seized the moment to reclaim some shred of control. He raised the wineglass in a sloshing, unsteady toast, the dark liquid catching the chandelier's light like a warning. "To family," he grumbled, his voice thick with sarcasm. Without so much as a sniff, he tilted his head back and downed the entire glass in one greedy gulp, the kind of reckless bravado that had probably fueled his rise to wealth and his marriage to Carol. The silence that followed was artistic, a masterpiece of tension. Emily froze mid-bite, a piece of lettuce dangling from her fork, her eyes wide with confusion. Carol's fork hovered over her plate, a single green bean impaled on the tines, trembling slightly as her hand betrayed her composure. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air heavy with the weight of what had just happened. And me? I leaned back in my chair, raising Gerald's water glass to my lips. The liquid was cool, tasteless, safe. I took a deliberate sip, my eyes locked on Carol's. "Refreshing," I said, my voice calm, almost mocking. The word hung in the air, a quiet declaration of victory. Her gaze burned into me, a storm of fury and realization. She knew what I'd done. She knew I'd seen her move, her poison, her plan. And she knew she couldn't stop what was coming. 3 minutes. That's how long it took for Carol's script to unravel. Minute 1. Gerald frowned, his thick fingers rubbing at his throat as if he could dislodge something stuck there. "Tastes bitter," he muttered, his voice hoarse, confused. His brow furrowed, and he glanced at the empty glass, as if it might explain the strange aftertaste. Carol's knife clattered against her plate, the sound sharp enough to make Emily jump. Her eyes darted to Gerald, then to me, her composure fracturing as the reality of her miscalculation sank in. Minute 2. Gerald's breathing turned ragged, each inhale a labored gasp that seemed to rattle in his chest. His collar, already damp with sweat, darkened further, the fabric clinging to his skin. "Carol, I can't," he stammered, his hand clawing at his tie as if it were choking him. His face, already pale, took on a sickly gray hue, his lips tinged with an unnatural blue. Emily finally noticed, her fork falling to the table with a clink. "Dad? Dad?" Her voice cracked, panic rising as she pushed back her chair and reached for him. Minute 3. Gerald stood, his movements jerky, desperate. He took one staggering step, his hand grasping at the air for balance. His eyes, wide and unseeing, locked on Carol for a fleeting moment, a silent accusation she didn't meet. Then, with a sound like a felled tree, he collapsed face first into the cocoa vin, the dish he'd despised. The plate shattered under his weight, sauce splattering across the table like blood, the rich aroma mixing grotesquely with that bitter, almond-like scent. The room erupted into chaos. The chaos was almost beautiful, a symphony of destruction that tore through the Lockwoods' carefully curated facade. Carol's scream wasn't fear, it was fury, a raw, guttural roar that seemed to shake the chandelier above, its crystals casting fractured light across the carnage. It wasn't the sound of a wife grieving her husband's collapse, but of a predator enraged that her prey had slipped the trap. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her eyes blazing with a hatred so pure it was almost tangible. Emily's hands fluttered over Gerald's still form, her fingers trembling as she touched his shoulder, his neck, searching for a pulse. "Daddy, please." Her voice dissolved into sobs, each one a jagged shard of grief and disbelief. She shook him, gently at first, then with growing desperation, as if she could will him back to life through sheer force of love. The sight of her, so small and broken beside her father's hulking frame, twisted something in my chest, but I pushed it down. This wasn't the time for sentiment. The paramedics burst through the door, their boots thudding against the hardwood, their voices sharp and urgent. I'd called them minutes earlier, slipping away during the chaos of Gerald's collapse to dial 911 from the hallway phone. "Possible heart attack," I'd said, keeping my voice low, anonymous. "Hurry." They arrived just as Gerald's body began to seize, his limbs jerking in a grotesque dance that made Emily scream and recoil. The medics shoved the table aside, sending plates and glasses crashing to the floor, and set to work with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, administering oxygen, preparing the defibrillator. Through it all, Carol never looked at Gerald. Not when they strapped him to the gurney, his face obscured by an oxygen mask. Not when Emily clung to the medic's arm, begging, "Do something, please, do something." Not even when Gerald's seizures slowed, his body going limp as the medics shouted orders and loaded him into the ambulance. Her eyes were locked on me, twin daggers of pure venom that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone. She knew. She knew I'd seen her drop the pill into my wine, knew I'd swapped the glasses, knew I'd turned her weapon against her. And I knew she'd planned this night down to the smallest detail, from the poisoned wine to Gerald's pre-existing heartburn as a convenient cover. We were locked in a silent war, our truths unspoken but undeniable. And worst of all, I'd won. For now. The paramedics wheeled Gerald out, the siren's wail fading into the night. Emily followed, her face streaked with tears, her hands shaking as she clutched her purse. Carol remained at the table, her posture rigid, her eyes still burning into me. The dining room was a battlefield, shattered porcelain, spilled wine, the remnants of a meal no one would finish. I stood, brushing a speck of sauce from my sleeve, and met her gaze. "You should go with them," I said, my voice steady. "Family sticks together, right?" Her lips twitched, a snarl masquerading as a smile. She didn't respond, but the message was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I turned and walked out, the weight of her stare heavy on my back. The night air was cool, sharp, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the dining room. I'd survived Carol's trap, but I knew she wouldn't stop. Not until one of us was gone for good. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and desperation, a sterile haze that clung to the linoleum floors, and the overworked staff rushing through the corridors. Gerald had survived, barely. The doctors called it acute poisoning, a clinical term that felt too tidy for the chaos of that night. His heart had stuttered to a near stop, his skin gone corpse cold by the time the EMTs shocked him back to life with a defibrillator-esque jolt. He lay in the ICU now, a tangle of tubes and wires, his once imposing frame diminished under the harsh fluorescent lights. The ER physician, a harried woman with ink smudged under her eyes and a clipboard clutched like a shield, pulled me aside in the hallway. Her voice was low, professional, but there was an edge to it, a curiosity she couldn't quite mask. "Do you know what he ingested?" I didn't have to lie. My response was calm, deliberate, a single sentence that shifted the weight of suspicion. "Ask his wife." The police did, and they didn't waste time. Carol's purse, left carelessly on the dining room sideboard in the chaos of Gerald's collapse, was their first stop. Tucked between her monogrammed compact and a tube of widow's red lipstick, a shade that now seemed grimly prophetic, they found a small vial labeled as the special vintage she'd poured for me. The lab tests were swift and damning. Digoxin, a heart medication turned poison in high doses, enough to drop a horse or a man of Gerald's size. The detective, a wiry woman with a no-nonsense ponytail, flipped through her phone as she briefed me later, her tone almost admiring. "Mimics a heart attack," she mused. "Clever. Damn near undetectable if you don't know what to look for." Too clever, as it turned out. Carol's meticulous planning, her predator's precision, was her undoing. The police subpoenaed her search history, and what they found was a digital trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to hell. The queries were chilling in their specificity. Digoxin lethal dose, undetectable poisons autopsy, symptoms of heart failure versus poisoning. Each search was time-stamped, a meticulous record of her obsession, stretching back months before that fateful dinner. My personal favorite, the one that made my blood run cold even as I marveled at her audacity, was, how long does it take for a man to die from heart attack? The date on that one? 6 weeks before she'd handed me that poisoned glass of Cabernet. But the real kicker, the piece that turned Carol's plan from malicious to monstrous, was the insurance policy. Buried in a stack of financial documents, the police uncovered a $1 million payout, triggered only by an accidental death. The beneficiary? Emily, her beloved daughter, the star of Carol's twisted family theater. The policy was dated exactly 2 weeks after I'd refused Carol's generous offer, a check for $50,000, and a thinly veiled threat to walk away quietly from Emily and the Lockwood family. I'd laughed in her face that day, standing in her pristine study with its mahogany bookshelves and suffocating air of superiority. I'd torn the check in half, letting the pieces flutter to her Persian rug, and walked out without a word. Now, I understood the stakes. Carol didn't just want me dead. She wanted me erased, wiped from the family portrait with surgical precision. No messy divorce to tarnish the Lockwood name. No scandal to ripple through their social circles. Just a tragic, natural passing, a heart attack at dinner, leaving Emily free, grieving, and, most importantly, rich. Carol had envisioned her daughter returning to the family fold, unshackled from the nobody she'd married, her future secured by a 7-figure payout. And if I wouldn't take her bribe and disappear? Well, accidents happen. A pill in a glass, a sip of wine, and the problem would resolve itself. Standing in that hospital hallway, the detective's words echoing in my ears, I felt a strange mix of fury and admiration. Carol's plan was a masterpiece of cruelty, every detail polished to perfection. But she'd underestimated me. She'd seen a stagehand, invisible and inconsequential, when she should have seen a survivor, someone who'd learned to read the room and rewrite the script. The courtroom was quieter than a Lockwood dinner, a stillness that felt almost sacred after the chaos of that night. The oak-paneled walls and the judge's stern gaze seemed to absorb sound, leaving only the shuffle of papers and the occasional cough from the gallery. Carol sat at the defendant's table, her posture rigid, her designer suit a stark contrast to the orange jumpsuit she'd soon wear. Her $500 an hour lawyer spun a tale of diminished capacity, painting her as a woman unhinged by stress, driven to desperation by a crumbling marriage and financial strain. It was a performance worthy of the Lockwood family theater, but it only half landed. The evidence was too damning, the trail of searches and the vial of digoxin too clear. Carol was sentenced to 5 years for attempted murder, a slap on the wrist, considering the weight of her intent, but enough to strip away her carefully curated facade. Gerald, still pale and shaken from his brush with death, didn't wait for the trial to end. He filed for divorce before his hospital gown came off, his signature scrawled on the papers from his ICU bed. The betrayal had cut deeper than the poison, it seemed. He'd always been a man of pride, and the realization that his wife had nearly killed him, albeit by mistake, shattered whatever loyalty remained. By the time Carol's sentence was handed down, Gerald was already planning his new life, one free of her venom and her cocoa vin. And Emily? She finally saw them. Really saw them. The scales fell from her eyes in the weeks that followed, each revelation a fresh wound. She saw the way Carol's concern curdled into contempt when Gerald's updated will was read aloud, leaving everything to my beloved daughter and her husband. The inclusion of my name, a deliberate nod from Gerald, was a slap to Carol's legacy, a reminder that I'd outmaneuvered her. Emily saw, too, the way her brothers, those loyal soldiers of the Lockwood dynasty, suddenly remembered prior engagements when she asked for help moving boxes from Carol's now foreclosed mansion. The family's wealth, once a river, had dwindled to a trickle under the weight of legal fees and Gerald's reckless spending. Funny how loyalty evaporates when the money dries up, how quickly the Lockwoods scattered when the spotlight dimmed. Emily's grief was quiet but profound. She mourned not just the near loss of her father, but the illusion of her family. She'd spent years playing the dutiful daughter, smiling through the barbs, believing in the myth of their unity. Now, she saw the truth. The Lockwoods were a house of cards, held together by fear and greed, ready to collapse at the first gust of honesty. But in that collapse, she found something new: freedom. Freedom to choose her own path, to love without conditions, to build a life untainted by her mother's poison. Carol's world has shrunk to a cell the size of her former walk-in closet, a concrete box where her manicured nails and designer heels are nothing but memories. She writes letters, I'm told, long, rambling pleas for forgiveness that Emily leaves unopened. Carol's power, once absolute, is gone, reduced to ink on paper and the faint hope of parole. Gerald, meanwhile, has embraced his second chance with the enthusiasm of a man half his age. He spends his days golfing on sun-drenched courses, his laughter louder than it's been in years. His phone, once a tool for business, now buzzes with photos of his 23-year-old Pilates instructor, a woman whose name he accidentally sends to Carol in group texts. The pettiness is almost endearing, a reminder that even Gerald, for all his flaws, knows how to twist the knife. Emily, she's happy, truly happy. The kind of happiness that comes from shedding a weight you didn't know you carried. We've built a life together, quieter than the Lockwoods' grand productions, but richer for its honesty. She smiles now, not out of duty, but because she wants to, and that's a victory Carol can never take away. And me? I still go to Sunday dinners, though they're different now. Gerald hosts them at his new condo, a sleek, modern space that smells of fresh paint and freedom. The table is smaller, the guest list shorter, just Gerald, Emily, and me, with the occasional appearance from a cousin brave enough to face the new reality. When I raise my glass, I pour it myself, the bottle held firmly in my hand. Gerald watches every drop, his eyes tracking the liquid with a wariness that borders on paranoia. His fingers twitch toward his own bottle, sealed, unopened, a fortress against the past. To family, I say, my smile easy, genuine. His laugh is more of a wheeze, a sound that carries the weight of survival and the ghost of betrayal. He raises his bottle, clinks it against my glass, and drinks deeply, his eyes never leaving mine. Funny how that works. The Lockwoods taught me to play their game, to read their tells, to survive their traps. And in the end, I didn't just survive. I rewrote the script, cast myself as the victor, and walked away with the only prize that mattered, a family worth keeping.